Good morning, Camilla Driver. Welcome to Western Sydney Unfiltered.
Good morning, Chris, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat to you this morning.
My staff make a joke that I'm never filtered, so the fact of being unfiltered is a redundancy. But in your role as Head of Infrastructure and Place at Transport New South Wales, you literally are the biggest builder in Australia. If you combine your partners at Metro, the sheer amount of money that Transport New South Wales as a cluster is spending is massive. Does that ever get a little daunting? Do you your contingency budgets would dwarf some small states' entire budgets. So just sometimes get daunting the concept of how much money that they're letting you loose with.
Well, a couple of things. It is a huge responsibility, and we don't take that lightly. Just in terms of the biggest builder, we're doing everything in partnership with industry. So yes, we develop projects and yes, we oversight the delivery, but generally we're working very closely with industry partners who actually do most of the designs and the actual delivery. So that's a really important point. We can't do it alone. And to that end, we're really focused on good partnerships and collaboration with industry. In terms of the scary nature of what we're doing, yes, but I think we're focused on the long-term outcomes and what we're delivering for New South Wales. And that's a really big theme in Infrastructure in Place. The team that works on these projects are very much focused on making New South Wales that better place to live, visit and work. And I think if we keep that front of mind, then we will deliver those good outcomes and be very focused, because we're very cognizant of the trust that government's invested in us with that level of investment. We need to do it wisely. And for us, it's not just about the delivery of infrastructure, it's also what legacy we're leaving behind. And that for me is about leaving a legacy of skills and employment, good placemaking and urban regeneration, and whether that's paths for cycling and walking, whether it's just better places that are safer and places that people want to go to, and making sure that we're multimodal. So it's not just all about roads or rail, but it's something for everyone.
Let's unpack that a little bit. You mentioned firstly legacy. One of the legacy issues and where Transport New South Wales has been the exemplar in legacy, and which is good because it's spending the majority of the money, about 75%, I think, of the state's infrastructure budget. So it's appropriate that it needs to lead the pack on the legacy issue as well. The legacy beyond the utility of the transport piece itself, which has its own, particularly in Western Sydney, that is a very important legacy with the tyranny of distance. One of those elements is very much, and I'm go to your role here, it's the concept of women in engineering that the transport's been very strong at as well in pushing its partners to and itself. What do you as a woman in this very significant role in the state's infrastructure sector, where you are the client for a good chunk of it, do you think something different as a woman in that role? What this whole argument about women engineering in a particularly female-dominated sector, what's your experience been, and how in growing that ambition will it change the sector?
Okay, look, I've always been in this industry, Chris. Did engineering at university. I love the industry. It's been a fabulous industry to me. It's given me so many opportunities and a diversity of experience. So I'm very committed and very passionate about the industry, but I'm also very cognizant and focused on the fact that we've got skill shortages. And the only way we're really going to do that is actually leverage the full community. And 51% of the population are women. So we've got to get more women coming into the industry. That will give us that workforce, but also I think will help to change the culture of the industry and support that sort of more collaborative place where people want to work. And I think there's a role for us to break down some of the misconceptions about what this industry is. Yes, it's not easy working on site. The hours aren't always great, but we can do things to address that. And it's not always a combative, aggressive environment either. There's plenty of roles for designers, technical consultants, architects, environmental. So there's a full gamut of opportunity. So in that regard, we're really committed to the new culture piece of work that's being done across the industry. We want to trial some of those initiatives on some of our projects this year.
Right.
to see what's possible, particularly around working hours and work practices.
I mean, the challenges now aren't the girly posters in the side office of wolf whistling. They're now more complex issues that were the final challenge to getting a greater female representation in the infrastructure trade.
Yeah, and look, I'm really pleased that half my direct reports are women, and all my direct reports are engineers, actually, bar my office. So it can be done, and I think it's really important that we have examples of how it has been done. I know that was important to me in my career. If I could see someone doing it or have done it, I thought, well, I could do it too. So look, I'm really committed to this issue. I do want to get out more into schools, universities, because we've not only got to attract people to this industry, we've got to keep them. There's a really high attrition rate, not just for women, but for men and everyone. For some reason, they don't see this as necessarily a place they want to stay forever, and that's a real shame.
It's certainly, as you know, the cost would be a well-paid sector now too. So I don't think at the moment wages are an issue in the region as a deterrent. So I think we work on those other areas. You also spoke about the nature of long-term legacy, not just the sugar hit from a piece during a transaction. As you know, when you're involved, we released our humanising infrastructure paper at the end of last year, and looking at ways that we can develop a pipeline of legacy, not simply on the process. Do you think there's a role for Transport to work with all its contractors to maybe take longer term ambition in their social license, their social legacy, so that we have not just one Indigenous coffee cart on that project, but a pathway of 10 years guaranteed to develop the social enterprises that can therefore be a sustainable legacy and not just as I said, the sugar hit during the project?
Yeah, no, look, absolutely. And I think there's some things we're already doing, but there's obviously more that we can do. But I'm also really impressed with what industry are doing themselves. They see that if they want a long-term sustainable workforce and also a social license, they're going to do good things in this space, and they are doing good things in this space. As an industry, we're probably not talking about some of the good stuff we're doing enough. So that's an opportunity. But we've now got the Infrastructure Skills Legacy Program. So that mandates what has to be done in terms of participation of women, Indigenous learning workers, apprentices, etc. So that's, if you like, the bit of the stick. You've got to do it. But we're actually seeing...
Yeah, you've embedded that for some environmental and training issues. Could you imagine, and you leave the rest for a bidder to put their best foot forward. Can you imagine going further with a compulsory piece so that you're embedding even more? Do you take on more Indigenous engagement? Do you take on women in engineering? Do you take on public art? I mean, where do you think the next steps are beyond the environmental and training issues you've effectively mandated already?
Look, the other thing we're really focused on this year is the Infrastructure Sustainable Procurement Initiative, which we kicked off in February with industry. Because again, we want to make a circular economy a net zero BAU. But we didn't want to come overnight and say this is how it has to be and you need to use this product or that product. We've actually sat down with industry and had a really detailed engagement process with them, because there's already a lot of great stuff happening. We want to work out what's possible now and what are the hurdles, because if we can address those hurdles, then it will become BAU and a matter of course. Yes, we still need a good framework to put in place, and we need to look at how we evaluate tenders to make sure that we actually do value these types of initiatives, and therefore we adopt them and they go forward. So we're really, really focused on legacy, and it goes back to your earlier point. With this level of investment, we've got to be doing more than just delivering a road or a railway line or a cycle path. It's got to be about the great place outcome for community, skills, training, environmental sustainability, participation of women, Indigenous, and a whole lot of other diverse groups. So we're very, very focused on all of that, not just building transport infrastructure.
It's important to always remind every transport minister this is an obvious economic portfolio, but it's also a social lever. Not only the equity of access, if you come from the bush or from Western Sydney and you grew up with the 2 trains and 2 buses I had to do to get only from Parramatta in those days to the city, but also the broader legacy. If we're spending $100 billion in the West on infrastructure, it'd be nice to know we get the legacy beyond the utility of the transport piece. You also spoke about, and I appreciate you talking about the role that industry, the leadership role industry is playing in that. It's not just you mandating, they're coming forward with better social license understanding of. That role of your background within transport is more in the old RMS, RTA roadside, where there was a lot more private finance in developing those projects. Rail now, although Metro is having a little bit of it, but standard rail has been less. While this is better for government policy, do you think there's greater scope where we can bring more private finance in after the great infrastructure binge of public money that's gone into a lot of this development? We're certainly pushed the concept of how we get a greater role for private finance back in helping meet the cost of what is increasingly becoming a tighter budget for you, tighter budgetary conditions.
Yeah, look, Chris, I was only at the RMS for 2 years actually before.
It was a very high profile. You did very well.
But look, I think the thing to say on this is you never rule out anything. And I think you're right. We're coming out of COVID. There are challenges in the world with supply chain costs increases, fiscal constraints with governments, particularly, also dealing with climate change, floods, bushfires, etc. So I think we perhaps won't have the level of funding that we've had historically. So we shouldn't rule out anything, and we should look at things on a case-by-case basis of what's possible. I also think going forward, there are more opportunities to leverage the unsolicited proposal process and even the direct dealings process to see how government can work more closely with industry and the private sector to actually unlock value for all. And I think that's a real opportunity. The last 10 years has been very much for me about putting the big spine infrastructure into South Wales. The big motorways, the new metro lines, and some of that's not finished. We're still in development and delivery, but we've got a really solid foundation, and we're on that pathway, on that journey. Now it's about looking at, well, how do we infill? What's perhaps some of the smaller projects that will deliver sort of material community benefit, and also benefit for places and probably private landowners? How can they work with us to unlock some of that value? So
I think that some of those, certainly in the Western City context, we've appreciated the spine from airports to metro lines, etc., and WestConnex motorways. I think in the future it's going to be things like what do we do about Mamre Road and Elizabeth Drive and unlocking particularly commercial land. Those things. How do you make the Westmead Parramatta precinct work better? How do you manage an Olympic Park, the world's worst roundabout that everybody comes a cropper on? So I agree. I think there is that sense for the effectively tier 2 transport issues that can go. But one of those it's maybe even it's tier 3, but it's the placemaking element, not to de-rank it, but in money, right? How do we as a community come to you and talk about things like a better Blacktown Transit Centre, a better way to walk between Macarthur Station and the University and TAFE without getting sunburned or beaten? Those small node placemaking around between you and Tahi. Is there scope, do you think, for the community to bring forward those ideas, whether it's under West Invest or normal business as usual projects, for as you said, the last mile stuff that goes to amenity, and for us, amenity is a productivity issue?
Yeah, look, in 2018, Transport issued the Future Transport 2056 strategy. So that was the sort of long-term integrated strategy for transport right across the state. We're actually reviewing and updating that at the moment, coming out of COVID, and that will
new Bible.
Yeah, so that will come out for consultation, I expect later this year. So that will be an opportunity for the community to have their say and give comment on that. Over and above that, we're reorganised a bit differently now in transport. So we have customer divisions, Greater Sydney and Regional Outer Metropolitan. They're the custodians, if you like, of those geographic areas and the communities and customers within those areas. So they're doing a lot of engagement, particularly now at a precinct level. We want to move away from project-centric engagement to more looking at precinct-wide. So that's an opportunity for us to engage with communities, understands what their needs are, and then those customer divisions, oh, my lights have gone off, actually come back to us and say, right infrastructure in place, can you develop and deliver a suite of projects that respond to that? Because we're only here to develop infrastructure for people, the people of New South Wales. So it is important that we understand what the community values and wants, and then we take that forward.
I'm conscious of your time. You've got a lot of money to go and spend on our behalf to improve our region. When we first started this chat series during the depths of COVID, we're asking people what they're watching on Netflix and how they were getting through. We've tilted down more to, as we're heading towards hopefully a post-COVID world of lessons learned. Coming out of that, and for what you've learned through this process, what's the one big bold idea if you got to be minister and premier and head of infrastructure in place for 5 minutes, what's the one big bold brave initiative that you might do differently in your department?
Well, just a couple of things. I want to mention COVID-19. Look, I think it proved what's possible if you have to. For example, change work practices. There was no community consultation or staff consultation. Everyone grabbed their laptop and went home and worked. And we look at what happened.
I think the Big Four accountants said we couldn't do it, right? It's not possible. Yeah, I'll give you $10 million. I'll tell you how you take your laptop home. It was the second. It was the second after Y2K. It was the second great hoax. It worked, guys. We did it.
Yeah, and just look what we're doing today, Chris. I mean, we'd never use video conferencing like we do today. But we also closed the construction industry and the infrastructure industry for at least 2 weeks and longer in some LGAs. That actually demonstrated a number of things. Just our reliance on certain workforces across Greater Sydney and
where they lived, largely in the West, particularly.
Yeah. But it was also a really good demonstration of how government, industry, contractors, consultants and unions can actually work very collaboratively together and deal with real issues really quickly, focus on our people and focus on ensuring that when construction reopened, we wouldn't have major impacts on our construction projects. So I think we've got to bottle that and recognise it can be done. We've just got to make sure that we do it and continue.
Hopefully it doesn't require a pandemic to make it happen, but yes, it showed we could do it in that.
Yeah. So in terms of the big idea, look, I'm not the Premier nor the Minister, nor the Secretary. I think the thing that we are focused on at the moment is this sustainable infrastructure procurement initiative, because that will give us some really immediate benefits, prove what's possible, again, a bit like COVID, but actually, again, support that long-term legacy. And it is about, addressing climate change, but it's actually also about efficiency. If we can reuse materials, so we don't need to buy as many and we don't need to move as many around the network, and we're not harming people's health as much, that's a really, really good thing. So I really want to focus on that because I think through that, again, it'll support our collaboration with industry, build those relationships, and again, contribute to a better place in New South Wales.
What a good place to leave it. Camilla, you have the confidence of a region whose its dependence upon transport when it's built is supreme, and its reliance upon the jobs driven to produce that transport is also supreme. So you loom large in the West, and your confidence is very high in us. So thank you for the team. Thank you for what the team did through COVID. We had a chance to thank the nurses and fireys and emergency service workers last week, but I think we never want to lose sight of our community is the people who builds everyone's communities, and that they got through, and we saw that levels of partnership otherwise assumed impossible before is credit to everybody involved, particularly those at the top. So thanks for it. Good luck and Godspeed, and we'll send through a list of about 20 more projects we have in mind for you. We don't want you to, if you get bored, we've got plenty more to do. All
good, Chris. We're probably looking at them anyway. See you soon.
Done. Thank you.
Okay. Bye. Bye.